Welcome. My name is Kendra Goldsborough, and I'm with Four Seasons Books. We are pleased to be a part of the conversation that is happening tonight with Richard Dresser and CATF. Now more than ever, we need artists and writers who are willing to take risks. And I'm so happy to be a part, in some small way, of making this conversation happen. Enjoy.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Hans Fogel, and I am honored to be a member of the Board of Trustees for the Contemporary American Theater Festival. And I'm excited to be with you here tonight as we continue our Unmuted series, opportunities to bring the world of the arts to you in your homes, maybe on your phones, wherever you happen to be. And hopefully you're going to have an opportunity to really engage in our discussion this evening as we take questions from the audience after we have our conversation. You can put questions into the comment section, and those will be brought to our, I'll say, panel this evening. We are very, very excited to have founding producer of the Contemporary American Theater Festival, Ed Herendeen, here. And as Kendra said, Mr. Richard Dresser. I'm going to let Ed give you a more detailed account of his career, but we are thrilled to have these spectacular artists with us here in Shepherdstown at the Four Seasons Bookstore. Good evening, gentlemen.
Thanks, Hans. And ladies and gentlemen, it's a real thrill to be with you tonight in this virtual world, in this digital world. And it's a real thrill to introduce to you, to welcome back to Shepherdstown, one of our most produced playwrights, Richard Dresser. 7 plays produced at the Contemporary American Theater Festival. And tonight we celebrate the publication of his first novel, It Happened Here. So when Rick called me up and suggested to take a look at his novel and actually said, wouldn't it be great to do this in Shepherdstown? I thought, what a great opportunity to get Rick back to Shepherdstown, to socially distance, and to actually have a virtual book signing. We don't know what that really means, but I know that Rick's going to sign a lot of books. And I want to take a minute to just thank Kendra for opening up our favorite bookstore for us to be together tonight. And Rick, welcome home. Your artistic home, Shepherdstown, West Virginia. And you know, we like to say Shepherdstown's the oldest town in West Virginia, doing the newest plays in America. And tonight we celebrate a new novel.
Thanks, Ed. I've had a lot of good times here. It's great to be back here. And I have to say, I've known you for a lot of years, and I don't think we have ever looked better than we do tonight.
That's very kind.
This is, and you didn't mention it, but this is actually also a return to Rick's honorary alma mater, Shepherd University.
That's correct. So in 2008, Shepherd University honored Rick with an honorary doctorate, and you addressed the commencement. You gave the commencement address in 2008 to the graduates of Shepherd University.
Yeah, I did. I think that's a testament to the fact that I was just here so much. They didn't really know what to do with me. But it was great to get a doctorate. At the time, my wife was trying to get a PhD in history, which she ultimately did. It was taking her a long time, and I said, I don't really understand what the problem is. I mean, all I had to do was answer the phone. So I don't know. She finally made it, and she did a lot more work than I did. But it was great to come back here for that.
Well, let's talk about the first time you made a trip here to Shepherdstown. It was Below the Belt, the first play, Ed, that you saw of Rick Dresser's, and it struck you immediately?
Yeah, I first encountered Below the Belt, the world premiere of Below the Belt at the Humana Festival in Louisville. And at that time, I knew I wanted to produce that play in our season at the Contemporary American Theater Festival. So I was immediately struck by that and put it into the season a few months after it opened in Louisville. So we did the second production of it here at the theater festival, and it's just been the beginning of one of those great long collaborations that is still ongoing today. You know, we're celebrating this book tonight, but we're also talking about many potential future collaborations, which is something that always happens when Rick and I get together. In fact, Rick, it was a year ago this fall that we were having a hamburger at the West Bank, and long before this COVID. So it's great to be here, and it's great to talk about some future projects. But Below the Belt, how did you hear about us? We were already on board. We were doing the play, and
Yeah, I was living in Los Angeles at the time, and I got a call from a playwright, Benji Aronson, and he said, "There's an amazing production of your play in Shepherdstown." And I'd never actually been to West Virginia, my first trip, and it was a brilliant production. And it was a breakthrough production for me because I saw the play in a very different way. Ed directed it, and it's one of the many great things about working in the theater is when you find your artistic comrades. And it's just, that was the beginning of a really great collaborative partnership in the theater.
You said something interesting that caught my attention, that you didn't know it was being done. Does that happen once you put your work out there in the world, that people pick it up and then you get to come and see it through a new lens?
Yeah, it got a bunch of productions after the Humana Festival. It ultimately ended up in New York, and then it ended up in Europe, where for some reason that I don't question, it was wildly popular in Germany. But I always look back at that production here as just really kind of a breakthrough for me artistically, just seeing that work and seeing the possibilities. And one of the things about being here was seeing what a smart audience was here in Shepherdstown. And I think it's because of Ed's commitment to doing bold new plays. You think of summer theater and you really think of sort of safe offerings that are going to make people feel good. And these plays didn't always make people feel good. They were very challenging, and I really wanted to be a part of it.
I think anyone familiar with the Contemporary American Theater Festival knows our slogan is Think Theater, and you will walk away thinking about what you just saw, having wonderful in-depth conversations like the one we're having here tonight, and one that I will invite again the audience at home to join us in via the chat. If there's something that pops into your head, feel free to throw it out there. We'll be taking those at the end of the evening. One of the other opportunities that the Contemporary American Theater Festival has provided is a chance for artists to branch out a little bit. Some people hear the word trilogy and they might think J.R. Tolkien or George Lucas. For Ed Herendeen, that's Rick Dresser.
yeah, we were meeting in one of our many famous meetings in New York, and Rick floated the idea that I'm thinking about writing a trilogy of plays, and he talked about what he was thinking about and what these plays would do. And I just, maybe call it naivete, whatever, but I just said, we'll do all three. And he said, I haven't written them yet. I said, listen, I believe in you. I believe in your voice. You have an original, unique voice. I really respond to Richard's comic voice, and we can talk about that even later as it relates to the novel. And it's dark humor. And I said, I'm committed to doing all three of these plays. So start writing them, and we'll produce the trilogy 1 year each year. And we did.
Yeah, people might not know how rare that is and what it actually means for a playwright, for a producer to have that kind of faith in your work and in your voice. The trilogy was about happiness in different social classes. And we were in a bar, so my pitch was very effective. And but I had to explain, and the plays are not written; they're not close to being written. That didn't seem to concern him at all. But it's an act of faith like that really has a huge effect on somebody's career. I mean, that's why I've always considered Shepherdstown my artistic home, because that kind of faith is very, very rare anywhere.
What's that mean for a festival like CATF in terms of its reputation, that they're doing that kind of bold new theater and taking those kinds of risks?
Well, there just aren't that many places that do it. And so you don't have to try to, I never thought, oh, this is a play for CATF. I just wrote what I was going to write. And that is real freedom. And again, not a lot of places do that.
What's important to me, Hans, is establishing relationships with writers. Our mission is very specific, producing and developing new American theater. And the best way to do that is to create lasting relationships with staying power with the primary artist, the playwright. And so Rick's one of those examples of a writer that you want to have staying power with. And it's been a great ride, and we're continuing.
And it continues, yes.
Well, and your career goes beyond just the stage. You've had great success writing for big movie studios. You've done pilots on all the major networks. You've gotten awards for your work on cable. I mean, really, your writing has been probably people have seen it and not even realized it if they don't sit and watch the credits at the end. I was looking through the Internet Movie Database and like, man, this guy's done everything. But this story, the story that we're going to talk about tonight, it happened here, is happening in a novel. It's not on stage. It's not on the screen. Why are you telling the story this way, and why now?
Well, I'm telling it now because I like a lot of us, I'm just so enraged on a certain level of what's going on. And I was turning into that guy that walks around the neighborhood talking to himself. And I thought, I'm lucky enough to be able to put it into words. Why not a play? It just seemed as if it was going to be kind of sprawling, a lot of characters. There are 8 characters. And I didn't want to worry about that. I didn't want to be constrained in any way. And in a play, you do have to keep an eye on how many characters is somebody talking to. You know, I mean, there are all these very legitimate things to worry about. And this story became so vivid to me, I thought, I've got to tell it exactly as I see it and as I hear it. And I told it's an oral history of an American family, which means it's all in dialogue form. It's all monologues, as we'll see when we see the actors perform some of it.
And we're actually to that point. I think we can talk some more about the process and the fact that this is your first novel. But Ed, I'll let you introduce our actors this evening who are going to perform excerpts from the novel.
Absolutely. And it, you know, Rick, the only thing I would add to what you're saying is, yes, it is so obviously about a family, a dysfunction in the family, and it's so obviously about a bigger idea. But at its most intimate is that it's a story about a family. And that makes it so readable and so identifiable to anybody that picks it up. It's heartbreaking, and it has your dark humor in it. So it's a great read. And when we started talking about having a couple of actors actually read some excerpts, I immediately, and you immediately, we thought of Lee Sellers, an actor that we've worked with on several of your plays. So Lee Sellers is going to read the role of, or the part of Paul in the novel. And Lisa Arundel, who's an actor you've worked with,
Right.
is going to read the role of Ruth. And so get ready for a really nice ride. And I think we'll now go to the excerpts.
Yeah, let me just set up the novel. It's an oral history of an American family from the years 2020 to 2035. So they're looking back on the 15 years that we are facing. And it's a family that's divided by politics, as many of our many families are. As Ed said, at the heart of the story, it's a very intimate story of a family making it through, or trying to make it through, extremely perilous days. So I'll just set up what we're going to see. There are different sections, short sections that we're going to hear. We start with Paul and Ruth. They've been married for a long time. They've got 3 kids. And this scene takes place in the week before the 2020 election. It could be happening tomorrow. So there's a certain amount of anxiety, if you can imagine that. And they get word that the great leader is going to address the nation. And so this takes place at their house in a university town.
When we heard the great leader was going to address the nation, Ruth announced she wasn't going to watch. This is his plan, she said, to keep us in a constant state of fear and agitation and always be at the center of our lives.
I was out walking and the streets were empty. I felt virtuous for being above it all, but then a block from the house, I suddenly started to run, so I wouldn't miss a minute of the speech. So much for my big pronouncement. I got home and Paul said, "When did calling him the great leader stop being ironic?"
I banged down a tumbler of Knob Creek and made my prediction. He's going to admit this whole thing is a branding exercise gone awry, so for the good of the nation, he's resigning. He's sorry about, well, pretty much everything he's ever done. He plans to have a final fling with a porn star, publicly demand to know what the hell the evangelicals were thinking by supporting someone so morally bankrupt, then join a monastery and live out his life in celibacy and silent prayer to try to atone for all the pain he's inflicted on innocent people.
I told Paul to shut up. I try not to do that, but sometimes it's necessary.
Strangely enough, my prediction was wrong. He read off a teleprompter. which always made him sound like English was his second language and he didn't have a first.
When he launched into a tribute to our sacred right to vote, I could feel my heart pounding. No, please, not this. Then he said it. Massive voter fraud has been uncovered. Voting machines have been compromised by radical socialist elements within our nation. Without free or fair elections, this is not our country. I will do whatever it takes to ensure that every real American's vote counts. We will win this battle, and it will only require the brief temporary postponement of the upcoming election. I have instructed Congress to vote on this immediately for the sake of our nation.
He talked about how he had incontrovertible evidence the demonstration in Washington was organized and financed by the Russians. Except he didn't say incontrovertible evidence. He said big, beautiful evidence from top-notch people. Only his strong actions had saved us from armed revolution.
All this was regarded, like everything else, as an issue with two valid points of view. Polling indicated that half the country was fed up by violent protests and the hacking of votes, and the elections should be postponed to preserve our democracy.
In the days after the announcement, everything was different, but it all looked the same. People heading off to work, kids playing ball, frat parties spilling into the street. But you could feel it in the air. Something had shifted. My anger turned to sadness. What a charmed life we'd had in the good old USA, and now we were sleepwalking through the ashes.
So after the 2020 election, Paul and Ruth want to do something positive. So they get involved with an underground railroad taking in refugees who are under fire from the administration. And it's a couple. The husband gets arrested right away. So it's his wife, Angelica, who's pregnant, is living in their basement.
One night, I woke up to singing. I couldn't figure out where it was coming from, so I got up and I wandered through the house. It was a lullaby that kept pulling me closer and closer. I went downstairs and realized it was coming from the basement. I was halfway down the steps, and there was Angelica holding baby Gabriel as she sang. She saw me and stopped, but I smiled and motioned for her to continue. She was singing so softly. How could I have heard it up on the second floor with the doors closed? Like everything that mattered, it was beyond understanding. Gabriel finally fell asleep, and she put him in his cradle. We sat on the sofa together, not saying a word, and I noticed the little things that she'd done to make our basement the warmest, most inviting place in the house. I never could have found her strength enduring the loss of her husband, building a home with her baby in a stranger's basement in a police state where going outside could get her arrested. All I could do was hug her and hold her. And then we kissed.
I think I knew Ruth was falling in love with Angelica before she did.
Raising the baby with Angelica mattered more than anything else. One little life brought into all this cruelty and madness, and we would protect him and help him grow. Paul and I had had this long, beautiful, intimate, hilarious conversation that had gone on for years. It started the night we met at a dinner party that was devolving into charades, which caused Paul to sneak out the back, and I followed. We were as giddy as if we were cutting school, sitting in his car, talking until a honking horn hours later meant that we had to move so that others could leave. Now, after years and years of love and marriage and children, we We've drifted into silence. I had more to say. I couldn't say it to Paul.
Where were the experts to analyze the data in the black box of my marriage to determine why it crashed? Maybe it came down to pilot error preceded by years of neglect. There's nothing more hopeful than a new baby, and the happiness after Gabriel was born slammed into the sorrow of the life I'd known coming to an end. Walking down the steps at 117 Poplar was an emotional kill shot. One day I'm living in a cozy house with people I love, and the next I'm unpacking my suitcase in a downtown rooming house and opening a refrigerator where people label their food. It was clearly time to economize. So I downscaled from Knob Creek to Heaven Hill and read the failing New York Times in the library. At first I kept to myself, but my fellow exiles were a generally friendly bunch, finding divine hilarity in their freefall into the abyss and nurturing unlikely dreams of a return to normalcy with prodigious drinking in the living room with the boiler clanging in the basement. After a few cocktails, it felt almost like family, except we didn't know each other well enough to cause real pain. Like drunks, since the beginning of time, we try to top each other with our tales of misery. I was in bad shape, but the competition was fierce.
By 2027, there's a crackdown on liberalism in the colleges. Paul's a history professor. He's speaking at a huge lecture hall when he gets busted by his own brother, who's the head of campus security. And he's arrested for inciting to riot. This next scene takes place after he gets out of jail in 2028.
I got released in April. I'd made the most of my time in jail, and having beaten the evil scourge of alcohol, I was more than ready to celebrate with a drink or two. It was a fine spring day when I lifted back to 276 Brook Street, where Phillips was installing bulletproof windows. I'm sure he was glad to see me, but he hid it well. Things are different, Paul, and they were. The old gang had moved on. Ted had joined a monastery, decent grub, a strict but fair deity, and an oath of silence, which freed him from the pitfalls of relationships and the English language. I parked myself in the living room, the scene of past glories, with the whiskey hour with Dr. Paul Weeks, and looked forward to the annoyance of getting bothered by my fans. But there was a new crop of shattered residents shuffling through, clearly overmatched by life in these United States. Julia suddenly appeared, anxious because her friend with the truck was late. She was finally moving into a dorm, which had been her original plan until she fell victim to our rooming house hijinks. I asked about her brother Jack and whether we could crank up the online rants, but she said he'd recently been named one of the top 5 clowns in Belfast, Maine, and was going all in on his clown career, which left no time for beekeeping or YouTube. Julia kept furtively looking around as she whispered to me, well aware that students could get a generous tuition waiver for informing on enemies of the state, that she was hoping to transfer to Bates because the university was no longer the one she'd applied to. The great leader's travel ban meant talented international students could no longer get into the country. Campus protests, you're welcome, led to martial law, and now the university, along with other college centers of the resistance, was facing the Educational Freedom Act of 2028, mandating a curriculum in line with the stated goals of the country, which meant the feckless ravings of the great leader would be drilled into the fertile minds of students all across the nation. The tweets that shaped America would no doubt turn up on a syllabus before long. My salad days of rooming house rants were over. 276 Brook Street had become a target because it once was a hotbed of the resistance, which is why local red hats would drive by howling racist slogans and shooting at the building in support of America and all it now stood for.
I met Paul for lunch, feeling guilty that I'd never visited him in jail. But we couldn't talk about anything remotely personal until after he held forth on his latest theory. He was convinced that time was actually speeding up. So many changes were coming at us. Technological breakthroughs, cataclysmic events, and the cosmic vibrations of the planet. That our perception of time was being transformed. We're leading a dog's life, moving more and more quickly from infancy to adulthood to old age to death. And while we fully experience each stage, it slips by faster and faster in an increasingly mad rush. In the 1920s, life expectancy was shorter, but the experience of life was longer. He thought, with this acceleration, we were hurtling toward the end of the species, or at least its transformation into some kind of digitally enhanced creature that was no longer quite us. One of his favorite themes, which for some reason always made him laugh.
I told her we'd kicked the crap out of the Cro-Magnons and the Neanderthals and all the other competition, tamed the land, and built a world to satisfy our every craving, which meant with our superior strength and intelligence and nothing in our way, what doomed us was our own selfishness. Nothing could stop our ravenous appetites, not religion or government or war or yoga or violence or love or paleo or porn or 12 steps or smoothies or cross-training or cross-dressing or cannabis or simple goodwill. We had to have it all, and hence would have nothing. Our lives would spin ever more quickly, warping time and the story of humanity, abridged, which started when our brains got big, would end with the last human, a bald, toothless, grizzled 3-year-old of indeterminate sex, moaning and whimpering as it gummed its way through a soggy Big Mac next to the silent, empty 405 freeway before rolling on its back, choking on its own vomit, and expiring. Fade to existential black, a fitting coda to a species that probably should have sought professional help somewhere along the way.
I said, Paul, the problem with lunatics is they say just enough that makes sense, so you buy the whole deal, which is a huge mistake. He liked that. And then we were able to talk like any other separated but still in love couple with troubled kids and a same-sex relationship who wish they could change things but don't have a clue.
So Paul and Ruth's daughter, Kate, has a wild, chaotic trip through America of 2034. And in 2035, she gets married in Canada, and the whole family shows up, and it's the first time the family's been together in many years.
At the reception, they were all doing this weirdly precise line dance. Young, old, drunk, sober, stoned, demented. They're smiling and happy, and where the hell did they learn it? Did they all sign up for a class and forget to tell me? Garrett asked why I wasn't out there with the rest of the family. I might spill my drink, I said. Why aren't you? I might kill the groom, he said, moving on to the bar. I watched Kate dancing between Neil, whom my brother would like to kill, and David, who was as deeply focused as if he was landing a jumbo jet full of orphans in the middle of a tornado with one engine out. My money's on him every time. The orphans would live, but does he have to overthink everything? Or maybe that's why he's the most successful of my children, not that the competition is all that fierce. At the end of the line, more graceful than all the others combined, was the one person who could have gotten me out on the dance floor. Ruth caught me lurking in the shadows, knob creak in hand, and gave me an encouraging little nod of her head, eloquently communicating, Christ, Paul, would it kill you to have some fun for a change? I responded with a smile that said, if we love each other, then why are we apart? We do better without words. If we didn't talk, we'd still be married.
Paul and Ruth lived in the same house. The whole time they were married, they raised their 3 kids there, but the time came when they had to sell the house.
You're supposed to make your kids take what they want out of the house when you sell it. But Mickey and Kate were gone, and David said that we should throw out all of his stuff. It was pretty emotional, going through Mickey's old sports trophies and clippings, and Kate's room was like an archaeological dig of her ever-changing passions. We found a Yamaha guitar we got her at age 14, which she left in a closet when she bought a fancy new one. Paul insisted on holding on to it, and we kept all their high school yearbooks and a few random things we didn't have the heart to throw away. In David's room, we found the football Terrence gave him and the old video of his miracle touchdown at the Thanksgiving football game. I asked him if he wanted it, and he said he'd rather remember it than see how lame it probably was. Paul and I took a break and watched the video. It was still awesome. There we all were, before the storm hit. The general and Hadley and Isaac and Ella and Kate and Mickey and Terrence and Paul and me and little David catching the pass and jumping up and down in pure joy.
So for the final piece, this is after Paul moved out of the house into a rooming house. He started doing these rants in the lounge, and a woman started recording them and putting them on YouTube. So he has a moment of being a minor online celebrity, and this is his first rant.
Every time the great leader lied, his breasts would grow an inch. Needless to say, they were blooming like hothouse plants. At first, no one noticed, but then the protuberances became an unavoidable issue, so he was fitted with a special man bra, and under repeated questioning from fake news, one of the great leader's meretricious press tramps insisted that the great leader's breasts are perfectly normal for a stable genius of his age, and anyone who thinks otherwise wants to hurt the great leader's chances of saving coal jobs and building a wall and making America great again, the way it was when there were steamboats and slavery and pussies could be grabbed with impunity. But the breasts kept growing as fast as the great leader lied, so he stayed out of sight in Mar-a-Lago, although he was occasionally seen hunched over in a golf cart with Don King, Rodrigo Duterte, and a cheerfully lobotomized Lindsey Graham. His face could be glimpsed in a window in the White House with an eerie smile, waving mechanically, and rumors were rife on cable news about the size of the great leader's breasts. And finally, his raging ego engaged in mortal combat with his fear of humiliation. The ego won, and there's a rally, estimated by his spokesbots to be 95,000 at a raceway in Georgia that seats 7,500. And with the entire nation watching, the great leader comes striding to the podium, and the deafening cheers of his poorly educated followers freeze, and the raceway is in stunned silence at the great leader, his enormous pendulous breasts slapping against his mountainous belly, his orange hair ablaze in the spotlight, his skin a quease-inducing color not found in nature. And before he can speak, he hears the sound that has sent a chill down his spine since he was a desolate teenage racist bedwetter desperate for his Klansman daddy's approval. Laughter. It starts with startled chuckles and builds to a wave of insane, hysterical howling. And finally, an obese drunk seated next to his identical twin, both encased in I'm with stupid t-shirts, bellows, "Show us your tits!" Others pick up the chant until the raceway is a crazed chorus of men, women, children, dogs, and ferrets all howling, "Show us your tits!" And the great leader, ever eager to please his excitable base, unbuttons his specially constructed canvas shirt, tosses it to his inflamed followers, and there, for all the world to see, are the great leader's enormous, swollen, sweaty breast, swinging free in the warm Georgia night, hanging below his bulging waist and growing ever larger as he reflexively lies, "This is the biggest crowd in the history of crowds." He turns to address the screaming masses, but the sudden movement causes the monstrous engorged breast to swing hard and accelerate and spin him around faster and faster like the dreidel game he adores playing with grandchild Arabella Rose, until the great leader is a mad blur of white breast and orange hair and swollen heaving belly and wild beastly frightened eyes, and his final plaintive thought before he careens off the stage to be stomped to death in the pit of hatred and resentment he created is, "Why are they laughing?"
That's several excerpts from the new novel from Richard Dresser. It happened here. Again, Richard Dresser is here in Shepherdstown at the Four Seasons bookstore with us at Herendeen. Founding producer of the CATF is with us as well. I'm Hans Fogel. Questions from the audience this evening, but really quickly, just a chance to reflect on what you just saw. I thought that was funny and sort of timely and scary all at once. What are you first time getting to see that work, Rick? What's your thought and reflection?
Well, I think it's clear that the great leader is a completely fictional character. I just want to make that clear right up front. I want to say that these actors, this is why I've kept coming back to CATF, because that's the caliber of acting. They got the material. We couldn't do a conventional rehearsal. They just stepped up and delivered. And frankly, watching it, it knocked me out, and it excited me about possibilities for the future of this piece.
Yeah, I agree so much with you. Just to see it again, because we worked on it, about a week ago,
Right.
And now to see how great Trent has really put it together on what we would call tape in the old days. I really appreciate the work that both Lee and Lisa put into this. And also to you, Rick, I mean, the words are very powerful. They were able to capture the dark humor. Lisa's, was heartbreaking when she got to that point about the family. So I really, really think the actors really rose to the occasion, because they were giving such powerful words to say, and they trusted. The one thing I've learned about working on your material is that the actor has to be very honest. You can't push for the comedy. You can't push for the sort of serious part of it. Just let the writer do the work and endow that writer, and they did a great job.
They were great.
And it really, as you and I have been talking since we first, it's probably been about 3 weeks now that we started talking about this, to think that we're now talking about how can we bring something like this, not adapting it, but how can we bring something about it happened here live to the stage, and I know you've been thinking about that.
Yeah, it started out. I thought of it as a play, and then it became this, and then I've sort of circled back after talking with Ed, and we've talked about what can we do with this material, which certainly in the hands of really terrific actors, really jumps out and pops, and so we're in the very preliminary stages of talking about how to create a stage piece from It Happened Here,
Yeah.
which would be a treat. It would be a treat to work on the material, but really a treat to work with you, Ed.
Well, same here, Rick, and to actually use this time, because here we are in this world, the dark winter coming. This could give us a chance to, I wish we could be live and doing it, but to be able to maybe bring some actors together on the Zoom, on the virtual world, and start working on pages with you, to see if we can start to, sort of form something together that could ultimately, within a year or so, be put on the stage. So,
Absolutely.
So I'm looking forward to where this goes.
Right.
So less than a day in Shepherdstown, and already your brand new novel is being optioned for a play.
Well, that's what happens when we get together. I mean, the only difference is we're not in Manhattan right now,
Right.
and brainstorming it. But it's really fun to think of those possibilities. And it'd be really great for those of you that are watching, just what do you think of that? You could send us a chat. You saw terrific readings from these two wonderful actors. Could you envision something like this in a theatrical?
Also,
Right.
someone certainly caught on to what you had referenced earlier, Ed, and that's the humor here. Obviously, you can see this turning into a real family drama, but there are humorous elements that last sort of monologue about the great leader, and there were so many elements in there, I think, that brought sort of the absurdity of it to light. But this is not meant to be satirical. Talk a little bit about the tone of this work, Rick, and what you were thinking while writing it.
Yeah, it sort of relates to what we were talking about before, that it really started with rage, and it started with this. Actually, this is the first thing I wrote of this novel, and I sent it around to some friends, and several people said, oh, you should do a whole book of these. And I kind of feel like where we are in this country is beyond satire. Satire, in a way, in this situation, for me anyway, it feels like it's almost normalizing it. And I didn't want to do that. What I wanted to do, history is written about the big figures, the great figures, and history is being written about our president even as we speak. But history is lived by us. It's lived by everyday people. And I think we all are going through something profound and something traumatic. And I became much more interested in the family, the intimacy of the family, how the family tries to stay connected. The political stuff is speculative and it's fun, and it was certainly fun to write. But for me, the guts of this novel are the family, and the novel for me is hopeful, and it's hopeful because the family does not give up on each other. There's a terrible division in the family. There are some huge, awful, violent acts that happen, and but somehow it is this almost primal urge to get back with each other. The other reason that I consider it hopeful, because I feel like if the family can solve their differences, then maybe there's hope that the country can. But I also feel that it's hopeful because what they conclude by the end is that there's only one way out of the desert, and that's if we take care of each other. And until we do that, we have been conditioned to be against each other. And when we truly take care of each other, that is the way we will survive as people and as a country. So I'm sure you couldn't tell from those excerpts, but it is actually it's a very hopeful book, and it's also not linked directly to the election. That is, that's sort of the taking off point, but it's about a family surviving prolonged crisis and trauma. And unfortunately, my feeling is that regardless of who wins the election, the division is there, and that's what we are all going to be dealing with, and that's really what the book is.
Is that part of you said 2020 to 2035 with
Yes.
this fictitious great leader?
Yes.
And clearly people dug in on all sides of it, very much as we are in our current election cycle,
Right.
and just weary of the back and forth. But were you able to get some sort of perspective yourself as you tried to write from all sides of that? And how do you go about going outside of your own views to look backwards fictitiously at where we are now?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, for me, the family had to be absolutely real every beat of the story. And looking back, it was their recollections actually have much more to do with themselves and the family than the politics. The politics is a given, just as right now we have to live with the politics of right now, but we're day to day, our lives, we're trying to carry on, we're doing whatever we do to survive. So that's their perspective is on the family. How does the family survive? I have to say, writing this book was, it was really great for me personally to go through it, and to go through it in terms of what family means, what these family members mean to each other. And I think one of the reasons the family feels real is that I got partway into it and I realized that I will never write a memoir. This is my memoir. I was talking to one of my brothers the other night, and there's so much in the novel that connects with my own life. So it's actually, it's a very, very personal story.
Talking with Rick Dresser about his brand new novel. It happened here at Herendeen, founding producer of the Contemporary American Theater Festival. When you start to look at that process of writing this down, we talked about not, originally maybe conceiving a play and then going into a novel. Talk about the process for writing your first novel. Is it dramatically different? Did you have to sort of pull back and relearn how to write, or did it flow naturally once you got into the groove?
I was surprised at how it flowed, how naturally it flowed. It actually flowed a little too naturally, because the first draft of this I felt like it was a little bit long, and since I never worry about word count or anything, and I checked sort of the word count of other novels, and I thought, I think my novel is a little too long, and I ended up cutting 100 pages, and there was great stuff. And actually, it was liberating to lose it, because what I did was everything I kept in the book had to move the story forward, and it was tricky because it's 8 different characters talking. There's no narrator, so nobody is telling you what the story is. It gives the reader a lot of credit for sort of putting these monologues together into a single coherent story. And since there is no narrator, the first, say, 20 pages, 25 pages are the trickiest, just because you have to figure out this is the style of the novel. But once you get through that, it moves very quickly, I think. One other thing I didn't say about the premise of the book, it's a 14-year-old girl in the family who is trying to figure out why the family fragmented at the same time as the country. And she thought she would come to some kind of answer. So it's really, she's as close as we have to a narrator, but she doesn't directly address the reader.
Do you think that you would like to write another novel after going through the process for this one?
I fear that it's an affliction, much like plays. I'm very deeply into another novel right now, and running into the same situation of many, many pages, but it's very liberating to do it. I don't know if it's connected to the pandemic, that, you know, spending a lot of time alone and not being able to go out and do plays or do anything else. There's something about this form that feels very liberating, very freeing.
If it gets too long, may I suggest a trilogy?
I've been down that road.
When people look at the content of It Happened Here, it may bring to mind the 1935 work from Sinclair Lewis, It Can't Happen Here, where he sort of satirically wrote about America falling into a totalitarian dictatorship. This work takes that a step further, puts modern connotations on it. Was that inspirational to you at all, or is it just coincidental?
It was deeply inspirational in terms of the title, which I stole, basically. No, you know, I hadn't even read the book until after I had this idea, and I thought I've really got to sort of like research the field. And yeah, this is very much of the moment. I mean, it's really about what it is to live in a totalitarian state when you still have Netflix and 2-day free shipping. In other words, the takeover doesn't happen with tanks rolling through town. It happens in a much more insidious way, and you still have, if you have enough money to get by, your life feels kind of the same, and there's only one thing you've given up, and that's your freedom.
And then how long before you notice?
Right. I mean, it's sort of what you said when we were talking before. It's so, it's a history that's so contemporary, it's happening right now. I mean, that first scene that we read it could be tomorrow. It's the anxiety that we're all living with. And then there's going to be an announcement on national television, and you have this ominous feeling in the pit of your stomach.
What's an example of the 100 pages that you cut? If this is what you put in and this is the story you're telling, what's left on the floor?
There was a lot about a character, Terrence, who is a veteran. And I just want to make one thing clear, that this book is not a left-wing screed by any means. I think the most sympathetic character, or 2 characters in the book, are conservative. And that was really, really important to me. I think that, there's enough out there that feels shrill and from one side or the other. And I was going for something with a lot more complexity of that and having it really about the characters. So Terrence, a veteran, ends up trying to find meaning by going down to the border with Mexico, and he gets involved in a very complicated situation there, and that is sort of a coming of age for him in terms of realizing what his position is in the country and how he's being used. And I felt like it was an interesting story, but it almost felt like a different story. So it was a lot of cutting. I have to say, it's as exhilarating for me to cut things as it is to write new things. I think because a lot of rewriting is knowing what to take out so that the story lifts off.
It Can't Happen Here. I look at George Orwell's 1984. These are stories that were told decades ago, and people keep saying, I've heard it said, I don't know how many times in the last 20 years, it's 1984, 1984. Is this kind of work, do you think right now we're contemporary, we're in it, but in 20 years they're going to say, oh, it happened here, and that's going to be that kind of work where we're just continuing to make these shifts in that direction?
Well, I think that what the book is about in terms of holding a family together during political turmoil, unfortunately, is a story that will endure. I mean, and as I said, it's certainly right after the election, people who believe that there's any kind of normal for the country to snap back to. I mean, I wish I had that kind of faith. I don't. I feel like this what we are living in, it's a long road ahead. I'm also an optimistic person. I believe we are on the verge of a lot of great things happening, but I don't see any kind of sort of solution to the viciousness of the rancor of the divisiveness in the country right now. And so that's why I hope this book will continue to have relevance.
Well, how do we move forward then? Because I think, to your point, people right now feel like the other side is literally the end of their way of life. This is no longer just about, you know, who's in the Oval Office or how the election goes. Say, darn, my team lost. People are afraid. How do we move past that a week from Wednesday and say, okay, here we are. We're still Americans. Let's be that American family, like in the book.
Yeah, again, a great question, and I wish I had an answer. I mean, I generally write, whether it's a play or anything, because I don't have answers, and that's where this book came from. I don't have an answer. I mean, one of the things that I find very disturbing about the year 2020 is that if you look at our history, when there's a huge trauma, tragic event, whatever it may be, the country has a tendency to pull together. I mean, after 9/11, George W. Bush's approval rating was just off the charts. Everyone pulled together and rallied around the country. And we're facing something that is just this absolute cataclysmic event. And the situation is so distorted that the one thing that is actually more effective than vaccines, the masks that we're all wearing, has become a political issue. And so what could save the situation has become something that pushes us further and further apart. So that's a hard thing to look at, to the fact that a terrible thing is happening, and it's pushing us further apart.
How did the pandemic impact your work, not only your ability to do the work undisturbed, but the feelings that we all had, the news, the perspectives? How did that influence what you were writing?
I think it influenced a lot because it's inescapable. What we're living through is inescapable. And I feel, I know people who stop reading the paper or stop watching the news and everything. I think it's in the air. I think it permeates everything you do. I mean, when the pandemic started, and I didn't decide to do this, but I started getting up at 5 a.m. and writing for 3 hours and keeping everything at bay, just because it was the only calm I could find in the day. And it's like, so I mean, but I think it's affecting everything. And like when the last time Ed and I got together in person, it was at the West Bank Cafe in New York, and it seems it was a previous life. It was a previous life, and this life that we are living now, I mean, the pandemic, ultimately, the storm will pass, but it leaves so much damage behind.
Richard Dresser, American playwright, screenwriter, teacher, and now novelist. It happened here. It's available at Four Seasons. They can get signed copies, as I understand.
Yeah, that's right. So we already have a bunch of orders downstairs that Kendra's got ready. So we're not going to rush off. We're going to sign some books. And
Great.
There's information, I think, on the website about how to get your book from Four Seasons. So please do that. And as always, it's a real treat to be able to talk about art in this time. And I agree with what you're saying about hope. Your plays, your dark comedy always ends, without being a spoiler alert with the plays, in a hopeful place. And it's that journey of going through a play with a cast to get to that place where the lights are fading and there is that hopeful sense. And also, you know, the American theater or theater in general has such a tradition of the family. And if they were happy families and everybody got along, nobody would be going to the theater. And when you add politics to the family and you add writers like Williams and Arthur Miller, and, you know, families struggle through with what's going on. And now you have taken this on at this time with a family that's so divided, and yet you can still maintain hope. This young girl who's leading us through this book in many ways has the hope that, you know, things will work out. But it's going to take work.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, I hope a lot of folks pick up copies and keep your eyes peeled for the development of the play.
Well, it's a conversation, you know, and that's how things happen, you know, but the conversation may go in a whole nother way, and something else will happen.
Absolutely.
But the cool thing is that artists are talking.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I'm doing my best to listen.
It all started with
Listen
this
to the
novel
art.
and this conversation. So, Rick, thanks so much for being in Shepherdstown.
Thank you. It's just great to be here.
Ed, thank you. And thanks to Trent and Gabby and Peggy and to Kendra for having us all. And thank you for tuning in. We'll hopefully talk again soon as we continue our Unmuted series for the Contemporary American Theater Festival. I'm Hans Vogel. Stay safe and have a good evening.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Precious memory, unseen angel, sent from somewhere to my soul. How they linger ever near me, and the sacred past unfolds. Precious memories, how they linger, how they ever flood my soul. In the stillness of the midnight, precious sacred scenes unfold. Precious Father, loving Mother, fly across the lonely years, and old home scenes of my childhood in fond memory of his. Precious memories, how they linger, how they ever flood my soul. In the stillness of the midnight, precious sacred scenes unfold.